She came frantically into our house, and she was yelling, "Where are they? Where are they?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Where are my keys?" I'm like, how would I know where your keys are? Now, in all fairness to my lovely wife, a couple days before that, we'd had a conversation, more so a one-sided discussion, where I informed her, hey, the best place to keep your keys is probably not in the cup holder of the car that you're actually driving. She's like, why? It's in the garage. And I said, precisely. Because then if somebody breaks the window and gets into our garage, they now have a key to our house, which gives us less time to load the shotgun if they break in. Because generally, you're not going to hear them as quickly if they just unlock everything. And some of you right now are like, he has a shotgun? There's a whole lot of other stories I could tell you at some point. So I'm like, we should just probably store the keys in the house. That way if somebody's breaking in, we have a little more advance notice, call the police, load the gun, that sort of thing. So a couple days before the frantic arrival in the house, proclaiming or asking, where are my keys? I may have, and by may have mean did, take the keys out of her car without telling her and put them in a location so that she would have to remember the little parameters that we discussed. That did not go over well. And now here we were a couple days later, and she thought I had done the same thing again. This time I had not. This time I was innocent. She was not in a mood to be rational. She was in a hurry. I'm easy to live with, so I don't understand what... That wasn't a joke. I don't know. So I started helping her look, and then I hear the door shut, and I get the notification on my phone that the garage door is closed. And she left, which meant she had found her keys. But she didn't tell me where they were. So I decided now was the moment to figure it out. So I picked up my phone, and I called her, and she answered, "What?" There was no hello. I'm like, oh, this is how this conversation's going to go, okay. And all I said was, where'd you find your keys? And there was a moment of silence that I wondered, how long are we going to be in therapy as a result of this ordeal? And she just said, don't worry about it. And that's all she told me, is don't worry about it. Now, I'm an inquisitive person. And I decided it would be in my best interest not to fire off a text in that moment, seeing as how she was already running a little bit later than she wanted to be running, and she had to go see some clients. So I decided to wait till later that night over dinner. And then over dinner, after the boys had left the table, I simply asked, where were the keys? And she said, in my work stuff, I don't want to talk about it. And that was the last we talked about it. She didn't know I was going to tell that story today, so we might talk about it again later today. I'm not sure, but have you ever been accused of something that you didn't do? Now, it might be keys, or sometimes it's a lot more important. Sometimes people attack your character. Sometimes people accuse you of things that you didn't do, but they accuse you of them anyways. In the day and age of which we live, social media, and where everybody has a microphone and everybody has a platform and everybody wants a reaction, those accusations can ruin lives. They can change things. Certainly part of the human experience, I think that every single one of us goes through at some point or another, is to be accused of things that we don't do. And how we respond in those moments sometimes is largely dictated based on what the incident is, what the accusation is. But I think universally we could all agree that it doesn't feel good to be accused of things that you didn't do. Whether it's from a coworker, or from law enforcement, or a spouse, or a child. How do we respond in those moments? What are the feelings and the emotions that you feel? Are you somebody who shuts down? Are you somebody who over-explains? Are you somebody who wants to run away? Are you somebody who wants to fight? Are you a mixture of all of those things? Over the last few months, we've been journeying through the book of Mark. And now we've arrived at the final hours of Jesus' ministry before he would be crucified. Last week, we looked together at Mark chapter 14. This morning, we're going to look in Mark chapter 15. So if you have your phones or your tablets, I'd invite you to follow along with us this morning in the Bible app. It's a free resource that you can find in whatever app store you utilize on your device. And once you have it installed on your device, either enable your locations or right in Lakeside, Algoma will pop up, and you can follow along with us. That way, if you have a traditional Bible with you, again, Mark is the second book in the New Testament, the second gospel. And today we're going to be looking at the first part of Mark chapter 15. And if you're joining us via the stream this morning, thanks so much for joining us. My name's Brian. I'm part of the team here at Lakeside, and the verses will be available for you on the screen below. As we've been journeying through the book of Mark, last week when we walked through a portion of Mark chapter 14, we saw that Jesus was betrayed. We saw that he was denied. We saw that he was arrested. And over the course of his arrest, before he would stand trial, which we're going to see today in Mark chapter 15, the rulers that had arranged and orchestrated all of this had already determined his guilt. They'd already decided what the outcome would be. Mark chapter 15, beginning in verse 1, we read this: "And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate." The ruling religious class had already condemned Jesus. He was condemned long before, even frankly before he was arrested. And now they wanted the government to acquiesce to their desires and to kill him. They wanted Jesus killed. They figured that would get rid of their problem. Now, Pilate was a governor over Judea, and he was sent by the Romans, who controlled the entire area. The Romans controlled the entire area, and so they would assign governors to different regions to keep everything lawful, to make sure that things were running smoothly in those regions. And the governor over Judea was Pilate. So the religious leaders who had a lot of sway in the community, they went to Pilate. And they said, "We've arrested Jesus, and we want you to take care of him." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered him, "You have said so." Now, there were a whole number of charges, as we're going to see unfold, but Pilate focuses on this one because this is the one that he cared about. Pilate asks if Jesus was king because that, if Jesus affirms that he is in fact king of the Jews, that affirms a political threat to Roman interests. Pilate is the governor sent by the government of Rome. And if there is going to be a king who's orchestrating a rebellion or an overthrow, that is a direct threat to the Roman government, who is in control. So out of all of the charges that Pilate was given, he focuses on this one: "Are you the king of the Jews?" Because this is the one that he ultimately cared about. And the chief priests accused him of many things, and Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now the chief priests accused him of a whole litany of things. A whole number of charges they trumped up. But the claim, again, that Pilate really cared about was not the spiritual claims. He was apathetic towards those. But the idea that if Jesus was king, that is a direct political threat. And yet, as Pilate asks him that, and Jesus merely responds, "You have said so," he then goes back to all the other charges that have been levied against him. And Jesus doesn't respond. Jesus refuses to get involved in a back and forth. He refuses to plead his innocence. He refuses to speak up and to refute those charges. He refuses to point out how he is the fulfillment to prophecy. He doesn't do any of those things. Now, Pilate finds himself in a unique situation. Powerful people from the area that you are in charge of keeping under control are telling you they want something. They demand it. They bring you a prisoner, and the prisoner refuses to get involved in the back and forth. And Pilate, as the scriptures tell us, is absolutely amazed by this phenomenon. Now, at the feast, verse 6 tells us, he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. Now, these are fascinating details that Mark includes for us here. We're now introduced to another individual, Barabbas. And the reason that we're introduced to Barabbas is because a tradition of the Passover feast was a prisoner would be pardoned. A tradition at the time of Passover is there would be a massive feast, and there would be a prisoner who would be pardoned, think every 4 years or every 8, depending on terms, as a president is leaving office. One of the things that they always do is they pardon certain people, and you can guarantee that it's going to raise the ire of their political opponents, and it's going to make news for about 2 days, and then there's the inauguration for the new president, and everybody forgets all about it. In this society, this was an annual event where there is a pardon, and it's public, and it's anticipated, and it's excited by the people. Now, there's Barabbas, a prisoner who we're introduced to here. And we're given the character of Barabbas, that there he is. He's a murderer. He's a violent man. He's been arrested. Another detail that's important to realize is, notice Mark tells us that he was involved in the insurrection and the attempt to overthrow the government. Now, if you are the governor in charge of a region and there are groups of people trying to overthrow you, that does not look good to your bosses. It's not something you are really a fan of. So we're given this distinction of this prisoner Barabbas, a violent murderer, and Jesus, who a number of charges have been made against him. And he won't speak to them. And Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And his response is, "You have said so." And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. People at the Passover feast, they begin petitioning Pilate. They begin petitioning him to pardon a prisoner. They're asking him to do them this favor, to show goodwill, release a prisoner as was customary. And Pilate thinks to himself, well, this is simple. Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Now, remember what had happened just days before this. That as Jesus rode into the city, people are putting down palm branches. And they're crying out, Hosanna, literally crying out to him, "Save us, save us, save us." And not a few people, by the way. A massive demonstration. And here he is, just days later. Pilate has this custom. He stands before the people And he discerned that the motivations of the religious rulers was out of envy. That the ultimate reason that Jesus was arrested and presented to them was because they were jealous of him. And he wasn't wrong, by the way. This is something that he perceived. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. So as Pilate asked the crowd, "Do you want me to release Jesus?" The religious rulers are working. They don't want Jesus released. And so they start working the crowd over, and they start working the crowd over to choose Barabbas, the violent murderer. The distinction could not be more clear. And you would look at this and you would think, how could you possibly make that decision? And yet that is what the crowd chose. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the King of the Jews?" And they cried out, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." Days before, the shouts of the crowd were, "Save us! Save us! Save us!" And now, they're "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" And the frenzy builds and it builds. So that Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas. And having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. You don't rise to the level of governor in politics without listening to the pulse of the people. And as the crowd is shouting out, "Crucify him," he gives the people what they cried for. He hands Jesus over. He's whipped. He's beaten. And he delivered him to be crucified. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion. And they clothed him in a purple cloak. And twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him, and they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. And they led him out to crucify him. As Jesus was led away, they begin to mock him. King of the Jews, they think. So they put a purple robe on him, a sign of royalty. And every king needs a crown. So his crown would be thorns. They twisted together, placed on his head, and then pulled down so that the thorns would dig into his flesh and blood would pour out. They took a scepter reed. They beat him with it. They spit on him. And then they kneeled down in front of him, as though they were bowing to a king. And then they let him out to be crucified. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. In those days when you would be whipped, the whip would go essentially tearing away all your flesh down to the bone. From the beating and the blood loss and the exhaustion of not having slept the night before and everything else. As Jesus is carrying the beam upon which he would be crucified upon. His body gives out. And there is Simon. And he's grabbed by guards. This is not a choice. This is not something that he wanted to do. This is something that is thrust upon him that he is compelled to do, the scriptures tell us. You carry it. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. The cross was taken to the place. Christ was led out. His arms nailed into the beam. His feet nailed. And as they crucify him, they take his clothes. And they cast lots for them. This is a game to them. This is entertaining. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." Around 9 a.m. in the morning, Christ was crucified. And they placed a sign on the cross. And the sign read, "The King of the Jews." And with him, they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." And those who were crucified with him also reviled him. As Christ is on the cross, beaten, spit upon, scourged, mocked, ridiculed, reviled. From those religious leaders and those who heard Jesus say that he would rebuild the temple. So you're going to rebuild the temple? You're going to destroy, rebuild it? You can't even come down. Save yourself if you're going to save everybody else. The reality that they missed entirely is a reality I hope you embrace. And that is this, that Jesus not coming off that cross, that Jesus not saving himself is the way that everyone else can be saved. Make no mistake about it, in a split second, in an instant, faster than you could imagine, Christ could have been off that cross. And yet he chose to continue to hang upon that cross, to continue to pull himself up, to breathe, only to have his body collapse and to go through this for hours. He continued to look out on those who reviled him. Above his head, the sign that says, "The King of the Jews." But not only is Jesus the King of the Jews, he's the King of all. And on that day, the day that there was a pardon, and the crowd chose Barabbas, on that day, a bigger pardon than has ever been seen before or will be seen again occurred. And that's what Jesus was accomplishing on that cross. That his death is the pathway that we all are pardoned from our sin. That he on that cross was a substitute for me, for all of my mistakes, for all of my sin, for all of my shame. That as Christ hung on that cross, what God supernaturally placed upon him in an act of substitution was everything that I have ever done wrong and everything I will ever do wrong. The things that haunt me, the things that I've forgotten about, the things that I will do one day that I will regret, all of those things were placed on Christ, and not just mine, but the collective of all of humanity was placed upon Christ. Because Scripture tells us the cost. The cost of sin is death. But Scripture also tells us that God made him who had no sin to be sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So that as Christ was on that cross, Divinity and humanity all wrapped up in one. God and man, perfection personified. God supernaturally transferred the weight of all of my junk. And He put it upon His Son. That's the greatest pardon that could ever take place. And that is something that we cannot deserve. It is something we can't buy. That as a result of sin, death had to occur. And it did. And the reason that Jesus stayed on that cross was because He was producing a pardon greater than anything we could fathom. The Scripture goes on to tell us that if you would confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that this is not the end of the story, that the story of Christ does not end on the cross, and that's something we celebrate next week. And spoiler alert, if you come next Sunday, it's going to sound an awful lot like this part. So just giving you a heads up, because this is our hope. The cross is not where the story of Christ ends, because if it is, Scripture tells us we're to be pitied above everybody else. Because if the story of Jesus ends on a cross, then the mockers were correct. But that's not where the story ends. So if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you'll be saved. And that is something that is available to you today. And the way you get it is by accepting the free gift. We live in a society that wants to earn everything, and you can't earn this. Because God's standard is perfection. You don't measure up. You don't make it. You can be a really, 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 really good person. But every single one of us knows we're not perfect. Christ was perfection and is perfection, and God transferred the weight of all of our mistakes upon Him. That is why He hung on that cross. And that is why the greatest pardon that would ever be realized occurred that day. And when the crowd cried, "Crucify," what they didn't understand was it was a fulfillment to their cry just days before of "Save us." And the way that Christ saves us is by staying on that cross. Jesus, thank you for your sacrifice for us. For setting us free of our sin. For taking it upon yourself. And offering us a pardon Not because we're perfect. Not because we meet your standard. But in the midst of our imperfection, you came to save us. And as the crowd cried, "Crucify," and as they reviled, and as they mocked, and as they ridiculed what they did not know and what they did not see, this was a fulfillment. Their pleas of being saved. So God, I pray right now for people who haven't ever made the decision to invite you into their lives and to embrace and accept the forgiveness that you offer as a result of your work on that cross. And I pray now would be the moment that they no longer delay. And right now in their hearts, God, they just cry out, "God, forgive me of my sin. And save me." Thank you for the work of your Son, for his death on that cross, and the hope of his resurrection. So God, I give you my life. And I live for you. Thank you for the sacrifice of your Son.